What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. Another episode here in the survival game series. My name's Jesse, and in this episode, what we did was we enabled the ability to split stacks in our inventory. So now if I hold shift on this item on the stack of 3, you can see we split it. It takes the higher of the split, which in this case would be 2, and then we can drag it and move it around. So if we recombine this, now if I hold the control key down and then start to drag it over, we take 1 off the stack. Same thing with this one, move it over just like that. So we got the ability to split the stack that we're working with on our inventory system. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Today's episode and others just like it are brought to you by the patrons listed on the screen. If you'd like to support the channel and future development, then consider visiting my Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee page, where you can receive various benefits such as early access to my videos, project downloads, as well as personalized support. You may also want to consider joining the community by joining my Discord server, where you can receive help from me as well as the community. So come on over and be a part of the conversation. All right, so before we get started, there's a couple of functions that we should have set up in the last episode, and I want to get to them real fast here. I've already set them up. I'm just going to point them out to you. Here we are in the inventory slot widget. So in here under event tick, go ahead and start the event tick, and we want to throw a branch in here, but we want to check. This is just like what we did over there on the inventory window. Is if the we want to get the player controller, see if the user has focus of this widget. So we're checking self here, branch it. If we do, we want to set focus to game viewport. The reason why we're adding this here to the inventory slot is because if you end up like dropping an item into the world from your inventory, then it puts focus on the slot, which means your keypad isn't going to work until you select something that isn't a button with your mouse. So in order to allow your keyboard to continue to function, we add this here. So next we need to go over to the on drop. We're still in the inventory slot widget. We come over here and we just need to add a set node here for the left click slot variable that we incorporated in the last episode. Put it in here after the clear drag brushes. This just ensures when we drop the item that we clear this variable right here. So that's all we need to do for that. So now we're still in the inventory slot. So let's go over here to the on drag detected function, which should be up here underneath your drag and drop functions. What we're going to do here is we're going to end up getting rid of all this. We're going to create a smarter way to do the drag and drop. This is going to allow us to, as you saw at the beginning of the episode, to split the stacks in half as we're dragging them around, or be able to move one object at a time from a stack. So let's go ahead and let's start a new function here. So come over here and let's hit the plus button for function. And I'm going to call this one set drag. And for this, this is going to be a little bit of a long variable here, a little bit of a somewhat complex. It's just going to be long. So let's try to keep it nice and neat. So we've got the get slot quantity here. So I'm going to pull this out. We're going to need this quite a few times here. But what we need to do is we actually need to run a select. So I'm going to write here, we're going to need 2 of these select. Just go ahead and drop them in here, and I'm going to drop a second one in here. We're going to end up needing both of them. So with the select, now what we need to do is we need to run a branch off the index. There's 2 different values that we're going to end up punching through here. We're going to plug this into option 0, but let's just go ahead and set up the index first. So the index, what we need to do is let's go ahead and right click and go get modifier key state. So from this, if we pull off of this and go you can see right here, modifier keys, we can check is Alt down, is Command down. This would be for you Apple users. Is Command down, is Control down, or is Shift down? So I'll show you this. You can do either one of these first. We're going to run both of them, is Control down and is Shift down. But I'm going to start off with Shift, and I'll point this out to you in a minute, where the difference in putting which first. So let's take this now. So let's drag off of here and plug that into the index. It's going to default it there to a boolean. So now what we need to do is take the quantity here. So if shift button is down, then we want to do a little bit of math right here. But if it is not down, then we just want to get the slot quantity. That means we're just passing along the full stack. We just grab the full stack. And we're going to check for control here in a second. So, but this first check is shift down. If not, we'll pass the full, and then we're going to run it back into the second one. So the math we need to do here, let's get slot quantity again. So I'm just going to duplicate this. Okay, move it back here a little bit. And I'm going to convert this to a float from integer. And the reason why we're doing this is I'm going to take this now and I'm going to divide this by 2. Now, you could have divided, obviously, the integer by 2. But what I want is I want control of this. Say you have 3 items in a stack. Then if we divide the integer by 2, it's going to come out to 1.5. And it's going to automatically determine how it's going to round that integer. What I want to do is I want to come here and I want to ensure by typing the ceil function, I want to ensure that no matter how this works out, even if the division here comes out to 1.1, I want it to round up every single time. So now if it's anything over a whole number, it's going to round up to the next whole number. All right, so that way now, like I said, if we move a stack of 3, we ensure that what we're going to grab here is going to be 2 and it's going to leave 1 behind. All right, so that's why we did it here like so. And just to make sure, let's go ahead and type a clamp. This is important here, is we need this clamp. So the minimum value is 1. We don't ever want to grab less than 1 item, depending on how this math turns out. And then max, this max doesn't matter too much. Just make sure whatever you do, I'm going to put in 1,000 here. Just make sure whatever this max is, it's higher than your max stack size for any item. That way you just make sure. So I just set it to 1,000. I'll never have an item, or at least I don't anticipate ever having an item stack over 1,000. If I do, well, I'll see that problem when it pops up. So now let's take that and let's just plug that into the true like so. And there we go. We got this first check done. So again, if the shift button is down, then we want to run this number. We want to clamp it down to a value in this range. If it's not, then we get the slot quantity, which is just how much we have in our current slots. Now we need to run another check here, and this is essentially going to be the same thing, but I'm going to pull off of here and let's go not. I'm just going to type an exclamation point, the not boolean. So if the shift key is not down, and let's just grab the get modifier key, and now let's go is control down. All right, so we've got these. So now we need to make sure the shift button is not down and the control button is down. So if that is the case, let's plug that into the select just like so. This means, so if we're holding both the shift and the control down at the same time when we're dragging the slot around, it's going to default to the shift button. It's going to ignore this one. It's going to put false. So whatever we pass out through here, which will go into the false, whatever we pass out here will automatically be done. So that's what I'm saying. If you put the control here first, then you're going to have the control take precedent and shift. The way I have it now, shift will take precedence over control. So if both of them are held down, then it's going to pass false. But if this is not held down and this is true, so not being true and this being true, then we want a value right here. And what value do we want? Well, when I hold control down, I want to pass just 1 item along. So I only want to take off the top of a stack. So I'm just going to default, I'm just going to hard code a 1 into that value right there. So now let's take this and I want to promote this to a local variable. I'm going to call this L_move amount, and let's plug that into the set right there. So from here now, what we need to do, let's get the slot quantity again. And then from here, I'm going to go subtract. We want to subtract the value of our quantity from our move amount. All right, so now let's grab our item, and from the item, let's set member in the struct. And what we want to set is we want to set the quantity in here, plug in the execution, and the quantity will be the subtracted value of this. So what we're doing is after doing all our math, this slot, we're going to tell this slot this is how much is left in here after we drag it around. And we're going to compensate for this later on, right? Because since this slot's going to be of a different value, we're going to have to maintain that information later on when we do all the other processing of it. So now that we have that, we've set the slot to have the correct value. So now we need to create a new widget. So right click, go create widget. And this widget we need to create is the dragged inventory slot. Okay, so let's go ahead and plug into that. And let's go ahead and split the item struct on this pin. Let's go ahead and grab our item variable again, and I'm going to split this out as well. So let's go ahead and split struct pin, and let's hook up everything but the quantity. So hook up the class, the inventory, and the index location. And then I'm going to grab the local variable move amount, and I'm going to take that and I'm going to plug this into the item quantity. And we're going to drag off of this in a couple of minutes. We will use this, but I'm just setting this here right now. We got a couple other things to check before we plug this in. So now let's grab our get slot quantity again. And then from here, let's check if our new slot quantity after we just set it is greater than 0. Drop in a branch. So is our new slot quantity greater than 0? If it is, then that means we still have items left in the slot. Let's grab our amount text, get it, and then let's go set text. We want the set text in parentheses, and then on the true here. So the text we want to set is the quantity, and plug that straight into text. It's going to convert it to a name or a text string for us. And if it's not, so let's drag off of here, and actually let's just grab the thumbnail. So now this is essentially, we want to kind of clear this out a little bit, but as you can see at the beginning of the intro, we're going to have this is going to end up kind of being ghosted if we take all the items as we're dragging around. I think it looks pretty cool. There's ways around that if you don't want to do it, but I'm just going to drag off here and go set color and opacity and plug it into the false. So the color we need to set it to is, I'm just going to move this up. This isn't really that important here. I'm going to drag it up to some random gray value. Let's say about right there is good. And I'm going to set the alpha to 0.2. All right, to give us a little bit of transparency on that. And that's what I set for the thumbnail right there. So now the amount text, I'm just going to duplicate that and plug this in. We're going to leave this out. We're going to clear this out because now the value is a 0 or less than 0. Then we need to grab the item name, and we need to clear the text on this as well. So set text, and then just leave the value blank. We need to clear this out. So now let's go ahead and create another widget and plug this in right here. And then now we're just going to run the execution from both of them right here. Now we're going to merge back into each other. And the class we need to do is inventory slot. Okay. What we're doing here is, if we come back out here to on drag detected, is you can see we're creating a dragged inventory slot. We already had one of these, and we're passing that as our default drag visual. And then we're passing ourself as the payload. Okay, so we're going to end up plugging in that drag slot inventory that we just created here towards the beginning. We're going to take this and we're going to continue to use this as our drag visual. However, this is going to be our new payload. We're creating a new inventory slot widget. That way, I'm just ensuring that we're passing along all the proper values with this inventory slot. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to split the item struct pin just like we did a couple of minutes ago, and grab our item variable and split this. And actually, sitting here looking at this, I think we're going to actually change this up. I realized I had redundancy in here and I didn't really need that. So I'm going to actually delete this create widget right here. Let's come back here to this create widget, because the way I had this set up before this, and you guys know I set up my projects before I record them, is I actually had this this was essentially the exact same thing. So I'm just going to take this and I'm going to control exit, come down here, and I'm going to paste it into place. So let's go ahead and hook in the execution pin there. And then we're also going to hook in the execution pin right there. And we're going to end up using this. Let's real quick, let's go back and let's just plug this in here. I'll make this nice and pretty and move everything a little bit closer in just a little bit. But yeah, so we're actually going to use this in 2 places, which is fine. So let's go ahead now. Let's create drag and drop operation. So plug in the execution, and the drag and drop operation will be our slot drag operation right there. And so now we're just going to use this for both the visual and the payload. That will work for that. So now let's go ahead and bring out a return node, take the return value here, drop it in the end, and I'm just going to rename this to be drag operation, plug in the execution pin, and there we go. So I'm just going to take this real quick and I'm going to control D it. I'm just going to put it down here. This is after we set the first member right there and before the branch. I'm just going to take it and I'm going to plug in the executions right there. So this is just like we had it down here at the end. And then this, I'm just going to come down here and I'm going to change this to the inventory slot widget. And we don't have to disconnect all this. This can come up here. We don't have to worry about filling in the owner HUD. So this is just going to be for us to pass along the information to the drag and drop operation. Anything beyond that is unimportant to us. It's just going to be deleted once we're done with this whole drag operation. So just leave this. I'm going to actually delete this reroute, Just going to take this, plug it into the payload and the default drag visual. I'm just going to come over here, add a reroute, and then just drag it down here. And this will be our default drag visuals, just like that. Let's jump into our slot drag operation. All right, so now we're in our WBP slot drag operation, and we just got a little bit of work to do in here. Actually, it's nothing major. Let's just go ahead and we're going to just delete a few things here, delete the knot. All we want is the under drag slot. We want to make sure, is it valid? Plug this into the return condition, and we're going to keep the payload the same. Let's just take it and clean it up a little bit. Cast, put it back into the cast right there. So now that we've got all this still needs to be the same, but let's take this execution pin and now let's just plug it into the true. So there it is right there. Take a look at it in case you need to correct yours. Now let's go ahead and jump into our inventory component. And actually, before we do that, let's jump back into our inventory slot widget, and let's go back out here to the on drag detected, and we need to put in the new set drag functionality. So right here off of the false, where we create these widgets, all right here, let's just go ahead and select those, delete them, and now we can just grab our set drag function we just created, plug that into the false, bring over the return node here, and let's just hook this all up like this. So there we go. This should have everything working now. So now let's go ahead and jump into our inventory component. All right, so inside of our inventory component, we're in the on drag drop function. We've got quite a bit of work to do in here, but so it'll take us a couple minutes to complete it. Hopefully you can stick around. This is we're going to be able to reuse most of the code that is in here. We're going to have to make a little bit of alteration, but we're going to have to add some functionality in here. We got to account for the split stack. So what we need to do, we've already got it coming in here as a split stack. So what we need to do is let's go ahead and let's just go ahead and disconnect this stuff for right now. We'll hook those back up in a minute. Give us a little bit of space in here. So now at the beginning of this, let's pull off of the drag slot. I'm just going to drop in a reroute node because we'll drag it down to the rest there in a minute. But let's break this out. And from this break, what we need is we need the quantity. We essentially need everything but the item. So I'm going to disconnect that there. So from here, let's drag off of the inventory, grab the item array, and then from this item array, let's get a reference and the item, the index location, plug it in there. So now we're getting the item, the dragged item that we're pulling in here. Remember this on drag drop, and I have the comment here. This is being called, this function is always being called on the under drag slot. Okay, so that's why we're getting the drag slot. We're getting the item array from there instead of from this one, is because we need it from the one we're dragging around. And then from this, let's go ahead and break this new one out. And the only thing we need on here is the quantity, but I'm just going to pull off the quantity and go subtract. So let's subtract there, and then I will hide the pins on that. And what we need to subtract is the quantity here. So plug that into the bottom of the subtract. So we're subtracting the current inventory that's in that slot of the drag slot, and we're going to subtract the quantity being passed through on it. And then we're going to set, we're going to have to update the quantity here. So let's create a new function, and I'm going to call this one update quantity. And the update quantity, let's grab a new input or set a new input for this. We're going to need a couple of them. Let's call this one item. We'll need to pass in the F inventory item. We're going to need another one. And let's call this one new quantity. And this will have to be an integer. Select integer there. So let's grab our item and let's break this out. All we need from here is the quantity. So we'll set that in a second. Let's grab our item array. Get a reference, drag off the index location. I said we need the quantity. I lied. We need the index location. I'm going to hide the rest of these pins. That's all we need from that for now. And then let's just go ahead and set members in this struct. And the members we need to set is quantity. So check the pin right there and then just type new quantity and then just plug that into the value right there. Drop in a return node. And let's head back out to our on drag drop graph. So let's grab our update quantity function we just created. And now let's just go ahead and plug this in right there. We'll hook it up in just a second. So now what we need to do is we need to make sure that we call this on the owning inventory of our drag slot. So I'm gonna drop in a reroute node. I'm just going to take this and plug this into the target. So that's why we dropped the inventory item we pulled off of here, is because we're calling this on this particular inventory right here. So that is being taken care of. And then the new quantity we need to set there is the value of our subtraction right there. And then the item will be the drag slot. So we're getting the drag slot from the right here from the input. We're just taking that and then resetting the new quantity in the function right there. All right, so that's it. Let's hook the execution back up to the branch, and then now we need to make sure we hook these back up. So grab the under drag slot. This goes into the top one. I'm just gonna clean it up with the reroute node, and I'll do that in just a second. And then from the drag slot from the reroute right there, hook that into the bottom one. All right, now that we got that all situated here, we need to create ourselves a little bit of space. So I'm just gonna grab this comment here, and I'm just gonna drag this way down right there. I'm gonna grab this top one, and I'm just gonna drag this way up here like so. Give us a little bit of space here in the middle. Now, ultimately, this top slot right here is going to be the same. The only thing we need to do up here is we need to come up here and in the true branch, and actually both of these branches, we just need to get rid of these remove items, because now we're not just going to remove them, because if we do this and there's still items left in the inventory, then we're going to lose items. So we're going to handle this differently. So just grab both these functions right here and let's delete them. Hook in the execution pins. And there we go. That should be about it. So this drag slot right here, we could delete the reroute I had right there. This doesn't need to be hooked into anything else. I could just stay right there. And you can pretty this up however you want, move everything a little bit closer. So now we need to come off of here. That's the true branch. So that's all going to stay the same right there. So we got the true right there. So off the false, I'm just going to disconnect the false execution right there. So now we need to run a branch off of this, punch that in right there. And what we need to check now is we need to check if we are dragging a partial slot. So we need to create a new function, and I'm going to call this one is partial stack. So we don't care how many is in the stack. We just want to know if it's a partial stack. Okay. So we can make this function. We can make this a pure call right here. So in the details panel, let's go ahead and make it pure. And for an input node, we're going to need an inventory item. So I'm just going to type item, and this is going to be of type F inventory item. And I'm going to name this, I'm actually going to name this so we know this is the only place we're going to end up using this function. You don't really have to create this function. It just makes your graph a little bit cleaner because it's going to be a big one. So drag item is what I'm going to call this one, just so I know exactly what I need for here. And from this drag item, I'm going to break it. You could just split the struct if you want to. I'm just going to break it out. And from the inventory, I'm going to get items, the array. And then from here, let's get a reference item location or index location of this item will be from right there. Now let's go ahead and break this out. And the quantity, is this greater than 0? So that's all we're doing is we're just checking to make sure that there is items left in this inventory slot. And let's run a return node, take the boolean off of our value there, drop it on there. And I'm going to leave it the name return value is fine. And then once we hook in the execution pin, make sure you compile it. Let's jump back out here to the on drag drop function. And from out here now, let's go ahead and grab our drag slot. And then let's grab our is partial stack. And because we made it a pure node, we don't have the execution pins. So just plug in the drag slot right there. And then we're going to punch this into the branch. All right, so now we're checking, are we dragging a partial stack? So let's just go ahead and let's run off of the false, because this one's going to be easy. This one's going to just come right down here off of the swap item slots. We've already got this all set up. So off the false, drag this down and put this into, actually we need to add a remove item node in here. So I'm just going to create a little bit of space, grab our remove item function, and I'll pretty this up in a minute. Let's plug this into the set members right there, and then our false, and then the item we need to remove will be the drag slot. So I'm just going to duplicate this, bring it down. So plug this into the item, but we also need to get the inventory. So I'm going to break this, take the inventory, plug it in there into the target, hide unconnected pins, and there we go. So now we set this up into the remove. So we're going to remove the drag item from its inventory, and then it's just going to continue doing what it did all the way through as it did before. All right, so now let's set up the partial stack function. So we've already figured out if we're dragging a partial slot. So now we need to get our under drag. I'm just going to cheat, and I'm just going to grab the variable right here, the under drag slot. Let's break this out. So the slot we're dragging over the under drag. So whatever's underneath the item we're dragging around, and we need to just get the class, and let's make sure that it's not the default class. Okay, so let's go BP underscore base item. We're just making sure this isn't a empty slot, and if it is, we'll handle it differently. So let's drop in another branch and we'll plug in the true value. All right, so if it is an empty slot, so if this is true, what we need to do is we need to get the under drag slot again. I'm just going to grab this and I'm going to duplicate it. And except for here, what we need now is we need the index location. So I'm going to select that right there, the index location. So grab our items array. This is on the under drag slot, so we can just drag over here. We don't need to get the inventory item. So get the item array, and let's get a reference to this index location. And with this, let's just go ahead and set members in the array. And the members we need to set is we need to set the item, and we need to set the quantity. So the item will be the drag slot. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to just cheat off this. I'm going to grab the drag slot and the break drag. I'm going to duplicate them right here. So from this, we need the item pin and the quantity pin off of this, and we can hide the other ones. So just plug in the item and the quantity right there. Hopefully this is making sense to you. I know I'm not explaining it all that well, but this should be relatively easy. It's just like what we did before. We're just having to account for these new phases right here. So in the under drag slot, we're just adding the new item, which is our dragged item. We're just putting it in there with this quantity. Okay. And we don't have to change the owning inventory on here because, well, or even the item for that matter, because we're saying it is an empty slot. So all this can just go right on in there. Okay. Hook this into the set pin right there. And now all we need to do is now we just need to update our inventory from here. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to take off of here. We need both these update inventory HUDs. So I'm just going to grab these and I'm just going to control D right there, plug this into the execution like that, and there we go. The true branches, that is done, and this next one should be just pretty much as simple as that. So I'm going to grab the add item and off the false, hook in the execution. Now the item we need to add here, so this isn't an empty slot. All right, so it's a partial stack and it's not an empty slot. So I'm going to come down here now with the add item and I'm going to grab the drag slot. Just going to drag, copy those off there again. And this one, we actually need the opposite to. We need the owning inventory and the index location, and grab the off the full item. We're going to just punch it in right there. So the owning inventory will go up to the target and the index location will go to the index location right there. And that's it. So now we can come over here, grab these two. I'm going to duplicate it, just plug in the execution pins. And the one thing we need to do off of here though, is we do need the return nodes off of both of these. So I'm just going to copy it in there twice and then hook them up. And then that should be about it. We do need to make one other change though, before we get too carried away. Let's go into the drop item function. And now we need to do a little bit updates here, because now before we were just removing the item because we were throwing, no matter what, we were throwing the full stack on the ground. So now we need to actually accommodate for this. So I'm not going to delete that. I'm just going to disconnect the execution pins from it because we're going to end up needing this. And we could probably actually left that plugged in right there, but I'm going to just create a little bit of room. Let's create slide the drag item back. So off of here, let's go break. All right. So we need the quantity and the item location. So I'm going to hide the other pins, bring out your item array, and let's get a reference to this location, to the item in this location. And then let's go ahead and break this. And then from here, we just need the quantity, and then take from the quantity here and let's subtract the quantity of this item being the one that we passed into the function. And then I didn't create enough space. So then from here, let's drop a branch. If this new value is greater than 0, then what we need to do is we need to update the quantity. So true, update quantity, take this, and we can drop it down here into the drop item. And we need an item for this. So let's just go ahead and take the item that we are passing in, the item parameter here at the beginning, grab that, and we can plug that into the item. And then the new quantity will be this subtracted value. So plug that in right there. And then off the false, just plug this into the remove item. And there we go. That should fix that up for us. Let me take a look at this. Let's hook up the execution pin to the branch, and that should make us happy. I'll clean this up on my own time. You don't need to see it. So yeah, so we're just passing in the item like we did before, except for now we're checking to make sure that there's any value left. If there is value in this slot after we subtract the value, then we need to just update the quantity with the item that we're passing in. And if not, then we'll remove it and just clear it out. And then we drop the item and throw it into the world. So let's go ahead and compile it, and let's just go ahead now and let's go test this. Yeah, so let's go ahead and pick up, we'll pick up all this right here and open up our inventory. So now over here we got 3 items. So if I hold the shift key down and drag it, you can see we get the ceiling, the higher of the 2. So we get 2 items right there, dropped it right there. And just to confirm everything still works, we can take this and just kind of drag them on top of each other. So now if I come over here and I push the control key down, I know you can't see it, but control, drop it, we only drag 1 off of the stack right there. And if you hold shift or control on one of these, you can see it's still only going to take 1 right there. And then this is what I was talking about here. You can see we kind of got the ghost item right there when there's no items left. I kind of like that. It just kind of shows you what's left right there. So that's what we did in the set drag function. So there we go. So now you can see what used to be in there. And again, if we drag something, and you can see it keeps it in there, it updates it to 1, drop it, and there we go. We come back in, it's all the same, and we can still use it. Everything's working just like it should. So hopefully you guys stuck with it and made it to the end of this. I know it was a little bit longer than usual, and I apologize for that, but we had a little bit of updating. I think that's some pretty necessary functionality that we have going on, being able to split the stacks and move around just like that. Now I think we can go ahead and we can start focusing on our crafting system. To be honest, I haven't quite fixed that yet, so that's it. I will be on that, and we'll get the new episodes. Until the next one, peace.